Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0. Welcome back to the channel. Enjoy the fanfic. And let's begin. Part 2. Once both the paperwork and the conversation was done, the Hokage called the newly renamed Team Kakashi together and told them of a good C-rank mission they could take. A minor merchant regularly took advantage of the convenience of sealing scrolls even if he could not create them himself, by requesting genin teams with sealing knowledge or a chunin team with the same to create a large number of sealing scrolls from blank scrolls and ink he provided to easily and conveniently carry multiple large barrels full of drinking water. He then made a trip to Suna with massive the amounts of water and wood in the form of those barrels sealed into scrolls. All carried in dull-colored bags in a single cart that could be pulled by hand. Along with a few other miscellaneous but not very valuable-looking items like food. Enough jugs of water for the group but not any extra, bits of leather and so on, sold the water barrels and food for a huge profit to Suna, and then bought metal, fine glass figurines, and other specialties of Suna there, had the original team modify the scrolls to seal the valuable bits of those items, or if they could not hired a team of Suna nin to do the same, then made the trip back to Konoha and sold the Suna specialties to Konoha for a profit. The merchant made this trip as often as possible, so it was a reoccurring C rank, but he usually waited a week or so after he arrived in either Konoha or Suna to request the return mission in order to recover from the journey and buy new blank scrolls if they had been damaged or were only one-time use, as well as commission more of the large barrels be made by a local he had an agreement with. The trip would take slightly more than a month, 2 weeks at a civilian pace to journey to Suna. A few days or full week in Suna, then another 2 weeks for the return journey to Konoha, but the Hokage knew that both Kitara and Kakashi had some sealing knowledge, Kakashi more than Kitara of course, so could easily make those scrolls, and it was a mission with almost no danger due to the route the merchant took, the non-value of his obvious merchandise, and the presence of danger that a genin team and jonin represented. The merchant always specifically asked for a team with at least basic sealing knowledge, and in fact most of the teams with that knowledge were on other missions currently. After considering for a few seconds, despite the mission taking longer than he wanted his team's first mission to take, Kakashi agreed, though told his team that he was not going to create all the scrolls himself. He would teach them the seals necessary by rote, inspect them for errors, and if they were good enough have them input the chakra necessary to activate them in the warehouse the merchant would be meeting them at. Kitara had only enough knowledge of sealing to create small scrolls that contained one type of item at a time, but with Kakashi's help could easily learn the type of scroll to carry the bulk composite items that barrels of water represented in an hour or less. Kakashi started an informal lesson and tried to teach Sasuke and Tomohiro at the same time as he was showing Kitara, to spread the chakra cost and help his genin, since such knowledge was extremely useful, but only Sasuke had good enough calligraphy skills to create a few scrolls as long as he was extremely careful. Kitara was quite excited to learn this new seal, and to increase her sealing knowledge. Since the academy would not teach practical knowledge of seals, just told genin of their existence, so her sealing knowledge had taken long, dull months of reading seal theory from the library, studying the few samples there are from the shops that sold sealing scrolls and explosive tags, begging or bribing the Hokage or an academy sensei to help her, and she still only knew a few basic seals well enough to create them regularly. Also, she was happy about the fact that their sensei was actually willing to teach them seals, since a brief check of the genin section of the library once she had graduated had not been all that much better than the academy section. Kitara knew the dangers of experimenting with new seals without supervision very well from the one time she had not been so careful and a storage scroll with a minor error had backfired, damaged the item she had been trying to seal, and actually exploded into smoke. Kitara later learned she was lucky it was such a minor and smoky explosion, since the Hokage had told her some people had died due to massive explosions or other extremely odd effects from poorly written seals, though most of the standard seal formula for sealing scrolls and even explosion tags were designed in such a way that minor errors just meant the scroll would not activate at all. Once Kakashi had tried to teach the three genin, examining their work after that quick lesson, he examined their work. Only Kitara and Sasuke's attempts were deemed passable, since Tomohiro's calligraphy was slightly too sloppy and his chakra reserves too small anyway, so the scroll he created could only seal the equivalent of a gallon of water, which was barely worth the cost of the ink and scroll paper, even if it would be worth more in Suna. Sasuke was satisfied with making 3 scrolls which held 3 of the large barrels, which could hold about 8 gallons of water each. Kitara wanted to perfect her skills and had chakra to spare, so she made 18 scrolls, 4 which could hold 3 barrels, 5 which could hold 4 barrels, and 9 which held 5 barrels. Kakashi himself created 5 scrolls that could hold 5 barrels, so the merchant was quite happy with the team and promised a small bonus to them for going so far above and beyond his minimum request of sealing at least 20 barrels of water. In fact, they had managed to seal every water-filled barrel in the warehouse that the merchant had rented. The entire team was excited to be leaving Konoha, doing their first serious mission, and seeing another country. Although bandits were known for occasionally attacking merchants along the route, especially before it reached Suna's desert, the presence of a Junin and 3 genin in full ninja gear was enough to deter the bandits, especially given the small amount and non-valuable merchandise that was displayed in the small cart the merchant carried. The team faced no combat there on the way to Suna. When they reached the desert itself, the merchant told them they would be changing the travel time, since a desert was both extremely hot during the day and cold at night. Thus it was best to get up slightly before dawn, the coldest time, start moving relatively fast to generate heat, then continue walking until just before noon, set up a small camp under a tarp to create shade, rest for a few hours, then take up the journey again until a few hours past sunset. Halfway through the journey to Suna though, just as they were looking for a good spot to set up their midday camp, a giant and very powerful sandstorm started, but even though it was quite a bit larger than usual and raged for an entire day, the merchant had been experienced enough to see the signs and knew the best way to sit out the sandstorm in safety. He asked Kakashi and the team to help him quickly dig a relatively shallow but wide pit just deep enough for both the cart and them to sit comfortably, then drive 4 long metal stakes deep into the ground at the sides of the pit and tie a heavy-duty tarp with strong rope over the cart and the people of their group. The sandstorm became quite frightening after 3 hours though, since it was powerful enough that it almost pulled 2 of stakes out of the ground, and quite a bit of highly abrasive sand and wind came through that side as the stakes were almost pulled out, but Kakashi had noticed in time, had Kitara, who was nearest, grab one stake and grab the other himself to hold the stakes down. He then had his team split up so every ninja could hold one stake down with both hands. The tarp itself developed minor tears which let more sand come through, but not enough to be dangerous. It did make it awkward to eat and drink water, but there were enough lulls that they could let go of the stakes one at a time, with the weaker merchant taking over holding that stake, so they could take short breaks for that. After nearly 12 hours of the sandstorm raging, it finally stopped. By that time it was past sunset and everyone was exhausted, so after digging out the sides of the pit enough to get out, since the tarp was nearly completely surrounded by sand that was almost a meter deep, and partially covered in sand as well, especially in the center, the team and merchant made up their bedrolls, ate a quick meal, and settled down to sleep. Thankfully for Kakashi's peace of mind, that was the only danger the team faced on the journey, though Sasuke had disappointingly grumbled at the lack of opportunity to test himself. Kitara herself was slightly disappointed as well, since she wanted to know if her training would work in a real situation. Tomohiro was simply relieved, since although the training with Kitara every day and even Sasuke sometimes had enabled him to use his sword more effectively and increased his chakra reserve slightly, as well as his physical skills and stamina in general, he still was not sure of how well he would do in actual combat. Upon arrival, the merchant had presented his papers to the guards, gotten a temporary permit to use one of the market stalls to sell his product, then led the team to a bare spot behind the nearly empty market stall manned by a local he also had an arrangement with, then had them unseal the scrolls one at a time while he actually held an informal auction for the barrels of water and other items. After 2 hours they had unsealed all the water-filled barrels, with the merchant having already sold most of them as they were unsealed. He then told the team to meet him at a specific inn unimaginatively called the Sand-Proof Inn, in 3 days' time to prepare for the return journey, since he already knew that Kakashi had enough skill to modify the scrolls to carry whatever valuable items he bought. Kakashi then told the team they could explore the public areas of the village, as long as they stuck together and kept their papers giving them permission to be in Suna handy, and that they had a choice to go up to a designated campground at the edge of Suna or pay money out of their own pockets to stay at one of the inns. While they were exploring and making their decision, Kakashi would look into getting permission to use one of the Suna training grounds, since there was a very useful Suna-specific technique, chakra control exercise called sand striding he wanted to teach, as well as continuing to have team training. After asking about prices, the team decided to get rooms at one of the inns for the first night, then camp out at the designated campground for the rest of the time, since sponge baths, comfortable clean beds free of sand, and an evening meal were included in the price, which was quite costly, but they all looked forward to sleeping in actual beds and getting slightly clean, too much to camp out immediately. Still, Kitara consoled herself with the thought of the money from the C-rank mission, and the fact that she got to see Suna, which had been quite interesting. The food was quite different from Konoha, with such things as fried lizard and cactus kebabs, a flat bread sweetened with agave, and a few other interesting foods and drinks. The only ramen stand was quite disappointing for Kitara though, since it was far more expensive than in Konoha, and she could tell just by looking the quality was much worse than she was used to. Although she knew how unhealthy it was and ate plenty of other things, Kitara usually ate ramen of one sort or another at least twice a week at Ichiraku's ramen stand in Konoha due to how easy it was to have a variety of toppings and how cheap it generally was. Kitara had been missing ramen since she had eaten none on the journey. Even the so-called instant ramen wasted too much water and was much too salty for it to be a good idea in the very dry desert. The team met up with Kakashi at the front of the very inn the merchant had shown them, in which the merchant had told them he was staying in, and told him their decision to pay for one night at the Sand-Proof Inn, which actually had the most reasonable rates for the services they offered. Kakashi told them he did get permission to use a training ground at the edge of Suna near the sand dunes, and he would meet them in the inn lobby at 5 a.m. the next morning to lead them there. For once, likely since there was not much Konoha ninja were allowed to do, Kakashi was only 30 minutes late the next morning. He then led the team to the outskirts of Suna, where there was a series of 3 large-shaped sand dunes with a few vaguely person-shaped rocks with targets painted on them scattered about, and a small cork target on a large boulder in the center of them. Since actual wood was rare in Suna, they did not have training logs, but Suna ninjas would bring their own cloth, cork, leather or wood targets to give something the weapon to sink into if they wanted to throw kunai and shuriken. Though since wind nature was not nearly as rare, many Suna nin used the rocks as they were and practiced sharpening kunai with wind nature chakra, then piercing through the rocks as they were. This was not the purpose Kakashi had brought them for. Instead, Kakashi told them there was a Suna-specific technique, and/or chakra control exercise that was called sand striding, which allowed ninja to send chakra from their feet into even the loose sand of a sand dune to walk or even run at a fast pace without slipping or sinking into the sand. Konoha had their own equivalents, the tree climbing and water walking respectively, but the Suna sand striding was just different enough and slightly easier that Kakashi wanted to start them on that, then he would teach them tree climbing once they returned to Konoha. Kitara learned the sand striding within an hour since she had already known tree climbing, and Tomohiro was not too far behind given his excellent chakra control. Sasuke did not manage that first day, but after they had gone to the campground he practiced on the regular sandy ground for a while, and by late in the next morning he could run up the sand dunes with sand stride just as fast as Kitara and Tomohiro. Kakashi had supervised from by a shady rock while reading his book, and once Sasuke completed the exercise he set the team to some more team exercises using compacted sand or small rocks in place of his usual props. At late morning on the third day the team met up with the merchant, who had managed to find all the materials he wanted to buy from Suna, including large special squares of compacted and purified sand of both standard color, reddish color, and a grayish-black sand that were meant to be very easy to turn into good quality tinted glass, as well as large ceramic barrel-shaped pots full of clay or dried meat and even salt. Apparently the blacksmiths who created quality tools and weapons from metal mined near Suna had already sold most of their stock to Suna natives, so had none to spare for the merchant. The materials the merchant had found were similar enough in shape and mass to the original barrel storage scrolls that Kakashi told the team they only had to change a few strokes of the kanji which defined what was being stored in order to keep the same efficiency that the original scrolls had. Of course, by design most sealing scrolls would gradually degrade in efficiency each time they were used or modified, so even the mass of scrolls the merchant had now would likely only last him 3 or 4 more uses maximum before he would have to ask for another team to create more for him. The merchant was quite happy with his profit and that the scrolls would even have more than 2 uses left in them, and repeated that he would give a bonus for the C-rank mission and asked whether they would consider doing this mission again for him in another 4 or so months. Kakashi said that there were no guarantees in life, but in 4 months if his genin team was not already on a different mission he would ask if the recurring C rank was available. The journey back to Konoha was even more dull than the first, with not even a sandstorm to add an element of danger to it, but Kakashi did have the genin practice their sand stride technique as much as possible. This was even more disappointing to Sasuke, with even Tomohiro asking if all C rank missions were this boring. The only reason it couldn't be considered a glorified D rank was the possibility of danger, the fact that the team had to leave Konoha and Fire Country, and the sheer length it took. Still, Kitara was happy since she felt they had learned a great deal, and Kakashi had finally moved on from only teaching them team exercises which Kitara felt gave hope that he would teach more in the future. Also, with one mostly non-eventful and quite successful C-rank mission they were more likely to get more C-rank missions in the future, which were quite rare for Genin since mostly C ranks were taken by Chunin. Genin had to have their sensei and the Hokage approval first, and could only take certain kinds after the Chunin got first choice. Getting actual practical knowledge of how to make a bulk storage scroll with composite items, then modify them after a single use was also a big bonus, plus the new chakra control technique and the knowledge that Kakashi knew enough to teach Kitara more about seals if she could only convince him to teach her, which was awesome in her mind. Even though that C-ranked mission was uneventful, both Kakashi and Kitara decided that the team needed to learn more, since if it had not been uneventful they might have had trouble, and there was the chance of future potentially dangerous C-rank missions. However, Kitara knew that Kakashi never taught them anything beyond teamwork, that one seal, and the chakra control exercise as well as repeating what they learned in the academy, though if he followed with his promise of teaching tree climbing at least Sasuke and Tomohiro would have a chance to improve. Kakashi was lazy enough that it was unlikely that he would teach more, only if a mission required more knowledge would he teach them, which may be too late if there was any combat involved. His quick lesson in sealing and the sand stride was the only thing he attempted to teach, and even that had pretty much been him slowly writing out the seals and explaining the bare basics of what was involved, then asking them to try to copy him. So Kitara knew she needed to go to another team sensei. Given that she still had occasional random conversations with Ten, when they saw each other Kitara knew that their sensei was a taijutsu nut, so she convinced Guy to let them train with his team occasionally, and she watched other teams training as well, spying on various genin teams and shinobi training or just outright asking. Kitara already knew the tree climbing exercise, but had not taught Sasuke since she had mentally associated it with her pranks, thus not remembered how useful it could be. But watching another sensei teaching his genin reminded her that it was a good skill in general, so she was glad he and Tomohiro would be learning it now. Kitara learned the basics of how to add wind nature chakra to kunai from watching Asuma Sarutobi demonstrate for someone, although she was too far away to hear details. She did know enough to know that Asuma was sending wind-natured chakra to his kunai to make it sharper and slightly faster. Although hard to get for a genin, through multi-layered disguise and story, Kitara was able to buy a single chakra-sensitive paper and found that her natural chakra nature was wind, so eventually she should be able to mimic Asuma's awesome trick. Kitara even started the elemental training for wind, cutting a leaf with chakra, which she had learned the theory about from the slightly bigger and more useful selection of scrolls available for genins in the Konoha library. She had also picked up another simple D-rank wind technique. Tomohiro did not have the chakra reserves and Sasuke overpowered his climbing, so both of them gave up on the tree climbing exercise after a while, only working on it sporadically when bored. However, both Kitara and Sasuke liked the idea of weights, so started wearing them, although they wore nowhere near the amount Rock Lee wore. Tomohiro started regularly exercising more, adapting Guy and Rock Lee's crazy regimen for a sword and his less obsessive work ethic. Because Kitara wanted to improve her control, she kept at the tree climbing exercise, making it harder for herself and trying to increase her multitasking by also sticking various leaves or other materials to her body, often getting up early, staying up late, and trying to practice whenever there were no missions or she was not sparring and training with Sasuke and Tomohiro. After a while she learned her harder version, and started practicing on every different type of surface available to her. It took her a long time to make any progress, but Kitara knew that chakra control was vital to learning new jutsu and using the ones she had more effectively. She could not train to exhaustion since she still needed to be ready for missions and training with Tomohiro and Sasuke, so it took her at least 2.5 weeks to be able to climb up her walls as well as trees with leaves, rubber bands, paint pellets, kunai, and anything else she could think of sticking to her while she was climbing, finally managing even when she was not concentrating too hard on that, and she still lost concentration or occasionally slipped or dropped various items. Overall, Kitara was very happy with her progress, and that of her teams, so resolved to continue working at this pace, although she was becoming increasingly irritated at Kakashi for not teaching anything other than teamwork exercises and assigning basic conditioning exercises to improve speed, stamina, and strength. Kitara had asked once, with Kakashi responding, "My cute little genin are doing well enough, the basics are very important and you need to know them well to advance even further. There is no need for me to teach you more at this point, although if you want I can teach you another chakra control exercise that will increase reserves if practiced enough, water walking." Kitara was glad to learn of another chakra control exercise, and hoped that learning about something so cool would motivate Tomohiro to finally finish learning tree climbing. During that time, the team went on many more D-ranked missions, taking the mission to catch Tora at least once a week, and were given another C-ranked mission 2 weeks after Kitara had learned her hard version of tree and wall climbing, about a month and a half from the last C-rank. This mission was to actually search for and break up a bandit camp. They had to bring camping supplies because it would take more than just a few days. Since Kitara had been saving her money from the missions, she managed to buy the materials to make a large sealing scroll which she then designed to hold multiple miscellaneous items, so she could seal medical supplies, the camping supplies for both herself and Sasuke, fish hooks and lines, and travel food in that. After 5 days of searching for the bandit camp, the team was ambushed by them. Although it was a surprise to the genin, Tomohiro only froze up for a few seconds before he recovered, and Kitara and Sasuke had been training with dangerous jutsu and kunai involved for so long that the bandits were actually easier, even if there were more of them. so no one was seriously injured, even if they were entirely defensive for a few minutes. The mission became dangerous when they learned that a B-ranked missing ninja was leading the bandits, but Kakashi protected them in his own way by leading the missing ninja away. During the course of the mission, Sasuke learned to activate his Sharingan. The B-ranked ninja had attacked, and Kakashi had used a Kawarmi jutsu to escape, replacing himself with a shadow clone instead of a log. However, the bandits had also attacked in numbers while Kakashi was busy dealing with the B-ranked missing ninja, so the team had to deal with about 15 semi-trained bandits with a variety of weapons, who knew enough to not get in each other's way too much and how to actually use their weapons. Sasuke activated his Sharingan while dodging those many attacks, which could have been deadly if a bandit got lucky. The 15 bandits were skilled and well supplied compared to most bandits due to their ninja leader, so were more of a challenge than normal bandits would be. Kitara also dodged attacks while deflecting some towards other bandits or away from her teammates, and retreated a bit during this time. Tomohiro took out his sword after those few seconds of frozen surprise and deflected attacks with that while also trying to dodge. All three eventually got over the surprise ambush and started counter-attacking the bandits while Kakashi dealt with the B-ranked missing ninja. After some very intense fighting, to the genin anyway, the bandits were either seriously wounded, dying, unconscious, or fled, while the B-ranked ninja was killed by Kakashi. The entire battle took barely 20 minutes. Afterward the team was exhausted, and many had cuts and bruises. Tomohiro was the worst wounded, since he had not really had time to use genjutsu. He had to rely on his kenjutsu alone. With the bandits not having enough chakra to steal, he had not even been able to recover the chakra he used to enhance his sword so it would not break and would deal more serious wounds. Kitara used her field medicine and bits of medical jutsu to put salve on and bandage the various wounds of the team and herself. After that, Sasuke told everyone how he had activated his Sharingan in the battle, sounding very smug. That was when Kakashi revealed he had a Sharingan eye as well, and would try to train Sasuke in how to use it. Kitara was trying to deal with the fact that she killed someone, but suppressed her shock long enough to focus on what was going on. She mentally recited what they were taught in the academy about coping with a first kill, that as a shinobi she was protecting her village. That information by Kakashi was a shock to Sasuke, and he immediately demanded to know how Kakashi got an Uchiha eye, since he knew that Kakashi was not an Uchiha himself. At first, Kakashi refused to answer, then eventually stated that one of his dying teammates had donated it in the distant past and refused to give more details. Although Kitara was proud that Sasuke had activated his Sharingan, she realized that she now needed to work even harder if she wanted to keep up, so remembering that Kakashi had used a Kage Bushin in the battle at the beginning, even announcing it to the enemy in the form of a taunt, she asked him to teach it to her when he was not busy training Sasuke. Kakashi warned her that it was an extremely chakra-draining technique for a genin to learn, considered a kenjutsu when multiple Kage Bushin were used, but Kitara did not give up. The Kage Bushin would be much more useful than the Academy Bushin Kitara could barely use, so she decided to nag him and argue with him until he finally gave in. A great deal of nagging and convincing went on over the course of a few hours from Kitara that surely just one was within her capability and he had taught her nothing else yet, while they cleaned up from the mission, stripped the bandits of belongings, tied up the survivors for transport and so on. She told Kakashi, "I have high reserves of chakra, and in fact kept overcharging the Academy Bushin until I learned the exact method of making multiple Bushin after mastering the chakra sticking and using up chakra first. I already know tree climbing, and can use it on walls as well for hours at a time, so a single clone should be possible for me." She also tried to make Kakashi a bit guilty, reminding him they could have died, they had just been in a serious battle, they had actually killed some of the bandits, and she really wanted something positive to focus on to make up for the nightmares that were sure to come. Tomohiro, Realizing he would be left behind, not to mention he might die as missions got tougher, if Sasuke learned to use his Sharingan and Kitara learned to use Kage Bushin, decided to put on weights and train more intensely as well as to try to strengthen his chakra reserves. All this took place as the team were cleaning up a bit and searching for the actual bandit base, just in case there were more bandits there. They then journeyed to the village that had commissioned the bandit cleanup mission while transporting the prisoner bandits. After he reluctantly agreed to attempt to teach Kitara the Kage Bushin if the Hokage approved, Tomohiro spoke up and asked if Kakashi would teach him anything. Kakashi recommended Hayate Giko to Tomohiro since Hayate was a kenjutsu master and could even use chakra attacks with his sword. He owes me a favor and has been trying to find someone to pass his style on to anyway. Hayate was chronically ill from a poison gas attack in the past, so could not go on active missions most of the time, instead stuck with guard duty and various tasks within Konoha, and if Hayate agreed to train Tomohiro as an apprentice, then Tomohiro could have a chance to become a sword master eventually. In between many more D-rank missions, all three trained very hard over the next few months. The Hokage had swiftly allowed Kakashi to teach Kitara the Kage Bushin as long as she agreed to be very careful with it. Since the Hokage knew that as the Kyuubi container and a Uzumaki Kitara would have plenty of chakra, that aspect did not worry him, but he did warn her of the dangers of memory feedback. Sasuke and Tomohiro finally mastered the tree climbing exercise and variations. Kitara was already practicing the next step up of chakra control of water walking by then, and promised to teach Sasuke and Tomohiro when they mastered tree climbing. Partially due to both Kakashi's and the Hokage's detailed warnings, and because it was obvious, Kitara had quickly realized the training potential of Kage Bushin, although she was extremely careful not to overuse it as per her promise. Kitara had limited herself to one Kage Bushin at a time for the first week, before realizing that she had enough chakra to make more without danger, so gradually increased the number of Kage Bushin she made one at a time. Kitara made sure that the Kage Bushin always dispelled one at a time though, with at least a minute between dispersal. With the use of Kage Bushin to help, Kitara quickly learned the basics of water walking, finding it easier than tree climbing had been, though her hard version of combining it with leaf and or other items sticking was more challenging due to changing her weight. In between missions everyone trained hard. Kitara continued to pick up E-rank jutsu from the Konoha library as well as bits of other skills, not focusing on any more big jutsu in particular but increasing all her skills in general, especially sealing due to now being able to use her Kage Bushin to set off tags. Of course, training with the others also continued, with Sasuke picking up more fire jutsu and learning how to use them faster, as well as learning to use his wires even more effectively, even as weapons in themselves rather than just guides for his inaccurate or extremely short range but powerful dragon breath jutsu. Tomohiro had finally reached the point that he could have matched Sasuke when he had still been in the academy, and had done enough drills to Hayate's satisfaction to start learning the basics of his moon style, as well as increasing his reserves enough to be capable of using 3 mid-level genjutsu or 9 minor genjutsu per day without needed to take others' chakra. After 1 month of this regimen, Kitara felt that she had mastered her other jutsu enough to use them effectively and decided to try to learn a new one, though due to wind jutsu rarity she knew it was unlikely there were any more D-rank wind jutsu available, and knew no one would be willing to give her a wind jutsu of a higher rank. So she decided to learn one from another element instead. After all, being well-rounded meant she would not be too disadvantaged if she faced someone who had an element that cancelled out her own, such as Sasuke, who she had to be very careful with lest his fire jutsu gain strength from her wind and backfire on her. Though training to use combos, with her strengthening Sasuke's fire jutsu or making her own E-rank to low D-rank fire jutsu he had taught her more powerful was also very interesting. Eventually Kitara convinced Kakashi to write out the instructions for a D-rank earth jutsu on a scroll, the head hunting jutsu, and started training in that as well. Although it took much more chakra than her wind jutsu, which came easier to her, she kept practicing, occasionally convincing Kakashi-sensei to help her. Her chakra reserves recovered extremely fast anyway, and she had large reserves anyway. The only reason she did not have more trouble with her chakra control was that she had made it a priority to learn and practice chakra control near continuously. So even when she trained close to chakra exhaustion, it was not a great risk and she could recover fast and keep up with team training and completing the D ranks. Over 2.5 months passed in this way, with Team Kakashi taking the reoccurring C rank from the merchant who journeyed to Suna being the only thing to break up the monotony. After that mission was successfully concluded, Kakashi asked if the team wanted to attend the upcoming Chunin exams. By then they had been genin for 7 months, with 3 successful C ranks and over 90 successful D ranks. They were definitely qualified. Hyuga Neji, Rock Lee, and 1010 had already declined or been held back by their sensei, but they were also a weaker team overall, since they were overspecialized, with both Neji and Lee focused on taijutsu, even if they were very different styles, and 1010 so focused on weapons. In order to compensate for that overspecialization, all three needed to be extremely skilled and experienced if they would have a hope of passing. However, Team Kakashi had a broad spectrum of skills that balanced and complemented each other. Sasuke had his Chunin level taijutsu, wire techniques, and fire ninjutsu, and with his new ability to use his Sharingan he could copy other techniques, even if it would take great training to master them to the extent as the original user. Tomohiro had Kenjutsu and Genjutsu as well as his chakra stealing technique that supplemented his weaker taijutsu. Kitara was well-rounded with good taijutsu, Kage Bushin, mastery of Kawarmi, basic healing techniques, the 2 wind ninjutsu, 2 low-level fire ninjutsu and the earth ninjutsu, as well as supplemental techniques for thrown kunai and shuriken, including making them slightly sharper with chakra. So Kakashi felt that the team had a good chance at surviving the Chunin exam, even though they were rookies. If you agree, I will nominate you 3 for the upcoming Chunin exams. Kiri is hosting them at this time, with Iowa expected to host them in 6 months. Konoha never sends their genin to the Iowa exams, so if you choose not to attend the upcoming exams you will have to wait a year for when Konoha will be hosting the exams again. Even if you 3 are technically rookies, since you have only been genin for 7 months, I am confident you can make a good showing at the exams and have a chance at being promoted. Kakashi-sensei explained. Normally I would leave it up to you to decide individually whether you wanted to attend or not, but since there will be travel time and we need to report our candidates ahead of time given how precarious our peace treaty with Kiri is, I will need to know now whether you wish to make a genuine attempt at the Kiri exams or not. Sasuke agreed immediately with attending the Chunin exams, very confident with his skill and wanting to test his Sharingan. HNN, I have solid Chunin level skills in taijutsu, fire ninjutsu, weapon handling, and with my Sharingan I'm immune to visual-based genjutsu with a great deal of potential to learn more ninjutsu and genjutsu. The Chunin exams will be a perfect opportunity to truly test myself. But the other 2 thought about it a bit first. Kitara did not really believe that a rookie team like theirs could pass, but she also thought that it would be helpful to learn a bit more about what they were expected to be able to do and that the exam could help them all test their training and learn what they might need to focus on for the future, so she agreed as well. As she tentatively stated, I don't really think I'm at Chunin level for all my skills, but training on my own or just with the team does not really give me a good idea of what to focus on to truly improve, so the Chunin exams will hopefully give me ideas. Kakashi-sensei, if we attend the exams and fail miserably, I expect you to actually help us more than the little you have already. If we don't fail miserably but still are not promoted, then I expect you to help us with our weakest area. Tomohiro was the most reluctant. Like Kitara, he did not believe they stood a chance at making the Chunin grade, and he was more uneasy with his newly learned skills, especially since Hayate had said he hadn't even truly mastered using his sword effectively, much less the moon style, and had given him multiple drills to do in order to improve before teaching him anything more advanced than the basic katas and the philosophy behind the moon style. Tomohiro also knew that there was a strong chance they could die in the exam, but eventually decided to go anyway for his team's sake, and resign if he thought there was too much danger. I know I'm the weakest member of this team. I know that I've only really started to seriously try to improve recently and have not made much progress yet. I am very uneasy at going to a genin exam hosted by Kiri, since they have a reputation for being bloodthirsty and have the highest death rate. However, since we can only attend as a team, and both Sasuke and Kitara want to go, I'll agree too, but I will resign if I think we are in serious danger of being killed. After all, the exams hosted by our own village will be much safer, and in a year I'll be much better than I am now. Unlike Konoha, who hosted the exams in their own village, Kiri refused to take the risk of attack or infiltration and held the exams in an area specifically designed to host Chunin exams, a temporary village for the duration of the exam that consisted mostly of tents and temporary shelters made of thin wood. The Chunin exam was held in an area that consisted mostly of swamps near the coast. It was technically held by Kiri since no one else had claimed that territory, even though it was not their main territory, since the main territory was a series of largish islands near that coast, with the actual hidden village on one of the islands and the capital on another. Because of this, and the reputation of Kiri, the Chunin exam was very small. Once he had their agreement and the three had signed the paper, there was a bit of paperwork sent to Kiri, with them sending back the exact location of the temporary Chunin exam and grudgingly agreeing to host the Konoha teams at an inn, with most of that inn being designated as guest quarter for the various foreign teams. Only 2 teams were sent from Konoha, Kakashi's team and a team with Kabuto and 2 other generic ninja in it. Kitara only knew who Kabuto was from the time she had spent at the hospital trying to learn more about medicine and medical ninjutsu, since he was one of the few who had been willing to give her a few basic tips. Anime and manga. The travel time from Konoha to the coast of Kiri was usually 6 days at normal genin speed, which was only slightly faster than civilian speed. But if both teams traveled at the top shinobi speed they were capable of, which was closer to Chunin speed, they could cut most of the 6th day out of that travel time, arriving near mid-morning of the 6th day instead of late night. Kakashi and the Jonin leader both wanted to get to the exam site as soon as possible, so told the teams they had volunteered to travel at top speed, with anyone who could not maintain that speed being given the option of a piggyback ride on their Jonin sensei's back. Thankfully, most of early part of the journey was in Konoha where the teams could tree hop, but everyone was expected to run at sprinting speed in the areas where trees were too thin to tree hop. Although the other ninja struggled to maintain the fast pace, only Tomohiro actually needed a break from running badly enough to ride on Kakashi's back. Both Sasuke and Kitara had just enough endurance, or pride in Sasuke's case, that they managed without more than the standard breaks, but both were usually very tired by the time the teams set up camp for the night. Kitara did notice that she became used to the pace relatively quickly, and was much less tired at the end of the 3rd day than the first, not to mention she managed to fully recover overnight instead of being as sore as Tomohiro complained about, but decided that since Sasuke did not complain much, this was how things should be for ninja, with Tomohiro just being in slightly worse condition due to his previous lack of work ethic, leaving him in near civilian condition. It was still a huge relief for everyone when they all came into sight of the gate guarding the entrance to the village. Although the gate was more a formality than anything else, the wall surrounding the small temporary village was short enough that a shinobi could easily jump onto the top and from there back down again. Once the gatekeepers had curtly checked the team's papers and shinobi IDs against a list provided of Chunin candidates and their sensei, the 2 Konoha teams were given directions to the inn where they would have guest quarters. The inn the Konoha teams were directed to was slightly shabby and clearly built recently, or at least massively repaired recently if there had been an inn in existence before the exam preparations. It was clean and basic foods were available, even if only breakfast, was free, so the Konoha teams dared not complain, especially given how tired they were. Once they had settled in the inn, both Kakashi and the Jonin from Kabuto's team stated they were going to scout out the surrounding territory, and would leave the teams to rest and prepare for the exam the next morning. All of the genin decided to eat a quick meal and take a long nap to recover from the grueling journey. Kitara did find herself waking up 4 or so hours later feeling mostly refreshed, and she decided she would do a bit of exploring herself, although she created 2 cage bushin that hanged as her teammates so no one would realize she was by herself. Kitara quickly realized that the inn was actually one of the few solid buildings in this village, with there only being 3 other buildings more than a single story high and made of solid timber with some stone. There was a second inn, some sort of administration-type building, and oddly what seemed like a large manor house repurposed into a library. Everything else seemed to be made with bamboo, thin sheets of wood, muddy bricks, or even a thick canvas cloth in many cases. Although Kitara had expected the Chunin exam to at least start out in the administration building, she found clear signs stating for Chunin candidates to gather near a large open space surrounded by multiple large tents at 8 a.m. the next morning for instructions for the first exam. After that, Kitara returned to the inn for supper, finding to her slight dismay that although the price was not very high, the innkeeper expected ryo from everyone before they could get food. There was no tab or expectation that someone else would pay later. The innkeeper also stated that although he would allow his kitchen to be used by the guests if they brought uncooked food, he would not store anything and expected them to clean up after themselves and to only cook when he was not using the kitchen himself to prepare meals for others. Once she had eaten, Kitara checked on her 2 teammates, finding both Tomohiro and Sasuke deeply asleep, so she decided to let them rest rather than trying to wake them up to eat. She then stretched and practiced some minor chakra control exercises before deciding to go back to sleep herself. The next morning, Kitara woke to find that although breakfast was free, it was very basic and there was only a limited amount available for each guest before they would be charged another fee. That fee was less than the price of a full meal, and Kitara knew she would need the energy to be at her best, so she reluctantly handed over more of her ryo from her hard-earned savings in order to eat enough to keep her satisfied. Near the end of the meal, both Sasuke and Tomohiro wandered out of their rooms to eat, and Kitara told them that Chunin candidates were expected to gather near the center of the village in an open spot surrounded by tents at 8 a.m., which was only an hour and 15 minutes away. Anime and manga. Once Sasuke and Tomohiro had finished eating, and everyone had made sure they had all their equipment ready, they all headed out to the place Kitara had previously found. They were swiftly reassured that the signs were not a trick when they found a few teams already waiting, and others trickled in. They then carefully looked at the headbands of the arriving and waiting teams to see who their competitors were. They discovered that there were 4 teams from Kurigakure, 2 from Iwagakure, 1 from Kumogakure, and 1 from Kusagakure, as well as Kabuto's team, when a ninja wearing a generic Kiri-style uniform arrived at 8 a.m. exactly and stated that everyone who was participating was there. He announced, Suna sent a team as well, but they have already been disqualified and sent back because one of the candidates broke the rules by attacking and nearly killing one of the gatekeepers. In case you did not already know, candidates are not allowed to attack any official associated with this exam, including gatekeepers, your innkeeper, any proctors, or even the vendors and villagers. Basically, Chunin candidates are only allowed to attack fellow candidates when we proctors tell you that you can, and are expected to politely follow instructions and obey any orders of the proctors unless you want to be disqualified as well. Now, all candidates will line up with their teams in front of the large green tent that is open and has a table set up with a fellow proctor. This first exam will not allow open attacks, although spying and subtle sabotage of other teams will be allowed. Each team will get a scroll that has a list of questions you have to find an answer to and report back to one of the other tents in this area, where a proctor will make sure you have them answered correctly. This will be timed. Every team has to report to one of the proctors by noon with the original scroll and correct answers in order to pass. Are there any questions regarding this? The proctor announced. Questions. One of the Iowa ninja asked, "What do questions have to do with the Chunin exam?" The proctor explained, Kurigakure's first official exam is an information scavenge hunt oral exam. All candidates will be given a list of questions to answer about the history of Water Country, fellow candidates, and some of the high-ranking Junin of Water Country from the past and/or its allies. We know that most of you foreigners will try to gain more information about us anyway, so decided to make that part of our exam in order to test your information gathering skills in a direct way, and since we also know you would complain that our own teams would have a huge advantage, some of the questions are about fellow candidates, and our Kiri teams will have questions about other villages they have to answer instead. In order to pander to the truly pathetic, we have a library, which will have at least half the answers to the questions somewhere amongst the scrolls and books. The rest of the information you will have to be a bit more creative to find out. Answers are needed by noon, so the longer you delay getting your scroll of questions, the less time you will have to actually find the answers to those questions. We expect both written answers and for one of the team members to verbally report the answers. Are there any more objections or questions? No one else had any objections or any more questions since they had been reminded of the strict time limit. The teams would have to question vendors and villagers, search for clues to about their fellow Chunin candidates, and search for the answers to those questions in the only library over the course of 4 hours. No one knew how many questions they would have to answer, so they were all eager to get their scroll as quickly as possible. Once the assignment was given, the team could technically go anywhere for that information, but had to verbally report the information to the exam proctors at the assigned tent within the time limit, with every question answered all at once. Each team had slightly different questions, although there was overlap between them. This list of questions Team Kakashi had to answer was this. 1. Who were the 7 swordsmen of the mist? 2. Name the 7 swords, what type of sword they are, their titles, their abilities, the original owner and/or current possessor. 3. Give full names for at least 12 Chunin candidates taking this exam other than your own team, as well as their village of origin. Campaigns and elections. 5. Name the first, second and third Mizukage and what they are best known for. Give a basic description of what they look like. 6. Find the name of at least 5 Jonin of Kiri, either past or current, who were not part of the 7 swordsmen or cage, and something of interest about them such as nicknames, abilities, or their specialty and any special rank they hold. Although neither of the 3 in Team Kakashi was really an information specialist, Kitara could now make up to 30 Cage Bushin clones safely as long as she was not going to do many high-level jutsu for a few hours afterward, and made sure they did not all dispel at the same time. Sasuke could try to use his Sharingan to find hidden areas and observe people to make sure they were not lying, and Tomohiro was likable enough by now, or at least could fake it convincingly enough, to charm the answers out of most girls he asked. Plus technically he could use a low-level genjutsu if that failed. So Kitara sent 10 clones to the library to try to answer the questions regarding Kiri's history and past legendary figures, with a few Ryo in case a bribe was needed. While 2 each would act as backup for Sasuke and Tomohiro's efforts, leaving 1 to act as backup for Kitara herself as she tracked one of the Kiri teams from a distance while using utmost stealth, and 15 more Cage Bushin in teams of 2 or 3 to track the other major teams to see if they would slip up and reveal information about themselves or about the answers to some of the questions. The Cage Bushin Kitara sent to the library found quite a bit of useful info from the library, although they did have to bribe the librarian for the organization system and actually needed to ask for clarification regarding the dates the scrolls, books were published and if there were any changes from the information published there. It was a very good thing one of the Kitara Cage Bushin asked the librarian, since one of the books with information regarding the 7 swordsmen of the mist was out of date, with at least 2 of the swords having changed owners since the time it was published, but for another small bribe, the librarian told her the most recent known owners of those swords. Tomohiro agreed to question vendors, villagers and even the kunoichi of some of the other teams to try to find out the names of at least 12 Chunin candidates, while telling them that the other Konoha team had a relative in it so he already knew all of their names. Sasuke agreed to try to find out information regarding current or past Jonin, and to try to find out some information regarding the current Mizukage. Kitara and her backup clone were slightly creeped out by the Kiri team she followed. One of the members seemed to be dressed up like a clown, with white face makeup and a modified jester-type outfit. That member also seemed to frighten his 2 teammates, since they kept at least 3 feet away from him and instantly agreed to any of his requests, even as they all tried to find information regarding their own questions for the exam. Since one of his first requests was for the team to split up, with one of the other team members doing the boring library research, Kitara was forced to quietly dismiss and then make another clone to update her own clones who were already at the library to discreetly keep their eyes and ears on the team member who was heading for the library. As much as he scared her, Kitara decided to follow the clown member, who she already knew was named Hisoka given the responses of his teammates, although she did not know his full name yet. She sent her newly made clone to discreetly follow the other male of the team, to try to find out his name or see if he would drop the names of his 2 teammates, since she had already heard the kunoichi agree to go to the library. Kitara had a minor close call when the Kiri nin dressed as a clown called out that, "I know someone is following me. If you do not show yourself and declare why, I will assume you are a hostile and attack you." Kitara swiftly decided to show herself and answer the Kiri nin, since although if a proctor saw this Kiri ninja might be disqualified, he could still seriously hurt her before that happened, and since it was a Kiri ninja that might be attacking, the proctors might be inclined to turn a blind eye to his disobedience. Martial arts films. My name is Uzumaki Kitara from Konoha. One of the questions my team was given was for the names of many of the other Chunin candidates, so I was following you to find out your name or the names of your teammates. Kitara swiftly said once she had shown herself. The Kiri ninja in turn told her, "My name is Satoshi Hisoka. My team also needs names of other candidates. If you tell me your teammates' names, I'll tell you my teammates' names in exchange." Although Kitara was slightly wary about giving that information, she reluctantly agreed, since it was an easy way to get 2 more names and it should appease Hisoka enough that he would not attack her. My teammates' names are Uchiha Sasuke of Konoha and Akado Tomohiro of Konoha, Kitara stated. My teammates' names are Kenta Taiki of Kurigakure and Masumi Katsume of Kurigakure, but before you leave, pick a card, any card, memorize it and place it back in my special deck, mind the edges though. I'll show you a card trick by shuffling my deck, then guess which card is the one you picked out, Hisoka playfully said, as he pulled out a deck of cards from one of his multiple pouches. Kitara warily moved close enough to pick out a random card from the deck, picking out the Jack of Hearts and memorizing it, then handing the card back. Hisoka placed it back in the deck without looking and rapidly shuffled the cards in a fancy way, then stopped and picked out a card seemingly at random from the deck and showed it to Kitara. Which sure enough was the Jack of Hearts. "That's the one," Kitara said in slight awe, wondering which way of the many methods possible he had marked his cards so he could easily get that answer. Hisoka had then let Kitara leave without attacking her, saying, "I hope your team passes this stage of the exam so that we might meet up again in one of the stages where battle is encouraged," with a slightly disturbing smile on his painted face. Kitara then carefully left, sorting through the memories of those Kage Bushin that had already dispelled and writing down what they had learned that was relevant, then sent out more Kage Bushin to replace the ones that had dispelled. She found that the library Kage Bushin had of course found the most information and had been writing out that information on a blank scroll she had handed to one of them before sending them off. But some of the Kage Bushin had also found out the names of 3 Jonin from Kurigakure, although one was deceased and the other apparently had become a sort of rouge nin right after that death, but she now knew at least part of the name of a previous seal master, Harusume, a Jinchuriki called Utakata, and a Jonin that did not have one of the great swords but still knew a variation of the silent killing technique called Chukashi. Kitara still hoped that Sasuke had found more detailed information, but the Kage Bushin with him had not dispelled yet to give an update, so she wrote that down anyway just in case he fell short of the goal. One of the Kage Bushin tailing the other teams had also been fortunate to hear the full names of the Iwagakure team when they had left the village for some reason and came back an hour later but had to go through the gatekeeper to do so Kitara wrote that down too, then headed to the library to help her library Kage Bushin. At 3 hours and 10 minutes their team met up and had managed to gather all the information assigned to them. Fortunately no one seriously attacked them to stop them from completing the exam or because of their suspicious behavior. Tomohiro knew the names of the other Konoha team, including Kabuto's previously nameless teammates, since one of them was related to him in some way, and the names of the Kumo team, as well as part of some of the names of the Kunoichi from other teams. Sasuke had found information on Suguri, head of the Hunter Nin division, thus automatically at least Jonin level, and Mei Terumi, previously a Jonin, holder of 2 bloodlines and considered a leader of a rebellion against the Mizukage. Kitara had found the rest of the information via her clones in the library and from tracking the other teams. She was uncertain about using partial names, but had no idea how long it would take to report all this information and knew they did not have enough time find more detailed information. The three headed toward the reporting tent and quietly shared their information, with Kitara writing it down in the blank space on the original scroll and on her separate scroll which already had detailed notes from the library Kage Bushin. Since one team member would be chosen to report the information, it was best to have it all written down. When they arrived, the proctor tested their resolve by questioning whether they were absolutely sure of their answers, telling them if even one question was incorrect they would be disqualified. He also tested their trust in each other by telling them only one team member could report the information, and if that one made a mistake in reporting the answers the entire team was disqualified. All three backed up slightly to go over the information again, nervous and unsure, and eventually Kitara was chosen to report, because Sasuke still did not like talking too much and Tomohiro was too nervous, feeling he would surely make a mistake, as well as the fact that Kitara had found the most information so would be less likely to make a mistake. Reference. Kitara was able to remind herself that even if they failed the first exam it had been a learning experience already, they had at least seen another country and knew a bit more about the Chunin exams. However, she also resolved to definitely find a more efficient way to gather information. She knew that most of the other teams had already finished or been disqualified by now, that her team could not focus on combat alone so heavily in the future. Since Sasuke was unlikely to be willing to learn anything that did not help him with his goal and she could not rely on Tomohiro, it was up to Kitara to learn that as well. Why do I have to learn and practice so much to balance out our team? Kitara spared a thought to mentally complain to herself, then sighed. She had to learn because she was the most committed to making this team work out. So she created a mask of calmness and answered the questions without stuttering or delaying, pretending she was giving the report from a mission, as Kakashi had the team do every once in a while for practice and because he was lazy. The proctor for the exam asked for the original scroll with the questions and then proceeded to ask them. This meant that other than the notes made separate from the scroll, Kitara had to answer by memory, making an already difficult task even worse. The proctor then read out the questions. Were the 7 swordsmen of the mist? Also, since it is related, name the 7 swords and their titles, abilities, the original owner or current possessor, and some of the nicknames or titles they gained as a group or as individuals. Kitara described what she found in the library and knew from the academy. The 7 swordsmen of the mist are the greatest swordsmen, people of legendary skill usually with pointed shark-like teeth capable of using the silent killing technique to hide and assassinate a target. Kitara then listed Samahata, Shark Skin, a great sword Dato, sentient and has ability to eat chakra. First owner was Fuguki Suikazan, second owner is Kisame Hoshigaki after the original was killed for turning traitor and selling information to Kurigakure's enemies. Kasame has gained the nickname Tailless Bu due to his humongous chakra reserves and skill with ninjutsu. Kubikiribocho, Executioner's Blade, Sever Sword, is a danto, has ability to regenerate using iron from the blood of those it cuts down. Current owner, Rouge Nin Zabuza Momochi, with the nickname Demon of the Bloody Mist. Nuibari, Sewing Needle, a longsword, Choto, has long thin wire trailing the edge so it can pierce and sew bodies. Owner, Kushimaru Kuriare. Kabutowari, Helmet Splitter, a blunt sword, danto, single-bladed axe and hammer linked together by a chain, said to be able to crush any defense. Owner, Jinin Akebano. Shibuki, Splash, Blast Sword, Bakudo has a scroll of explosive tags incorporated in it. Owner, Jinpachi Munashi. Kiba, Cutting Fangs, Thunderswords, Raito twin swords infused with lightning. First owner, Ringo Amayuri, the sole female swordsman of the mist, most currently known wielder, Raiga Kurosuke. Haramakere, Twin Sword, Soto with ability to emit chakra and change forms. First owner, Mangetsu Hazuka, no verified information regarding the current wielder if anyone is even wielding it, might be in storage until a worthy wielder is found, or it might be stolen, rumors vary. The proctor then read out, "Who are your fellow Chunin candidates? Give names for at least 12 candidates taking this exam other than your own team, as well as their village of origin." Kitara answered, Kabuto Yakushi from Kanahagakure, Yoroi Akado from Kanahagakure, Masumi Sergi from Kanahagakure, Kenta Taiki of Kurigakure, Masumi Katsum of Kurigakure, Hisoka Satoshi of Kurigakure, Yuruyu Akita of Iwagakure, Isao Kazuhiko of Iwagakure, Azuma Tezuki of Iwagakure, Karui of Kumogakure, Omoi of Kumogakure, Samui of Kumogakure. The proctor interrupted Kitara at this point, asking, "Do you have a basic physical description of at least 6 of these Chunin candidates? Especially since you only have the personal name of the candidates from Kumogakure, not their full names. A physical description will make up for that lack, otherwise you fail. It may not have been required, but it should be easy for you to recall such basic information. After all, learning their names was much more difficult than just looking at them." Kitara answered, "Yes, Kabuto Yakushi from Kanahagakure has silver hair, and wears glasses. Yoroi Akado, insert physical description, Masumi Sergi, insert physical description. Hisoka Satoshi of Kurigakure wears white makeup on his face, a modified jester suit, reddish hair. Karui of Kumogakure, insert description, Omoi, insert description, Samui, insert description." Finally, the proctor read out the next to last question, "Name the first, second, third and fourth Mizukage and what they are best known for." Kitara then responded, "First Mizukage, Byakuran, known to be cautious and suspicious in nature, but frank, had a great deal of hair including a mustache and massive beard and a scar over one eye. Point 2 ND Mizukage, Genjutsu Hazuka, known for his yin release genjutsu, ability to summon a giant clam, Hazuka bloodline ability to turn his body to liquid, and water release ninjutsu. He had pale blonde hair and dark brown or black eyes. Third Mizukage, he had long black hair with decorative pearls peeping out and seemingly black sclerae with no pupils. Not much is known about him other than that he acted as a bodyguard for the first Mizukage during the first Cage Summit. Fourth Mizukage, Yugura Karachi, Jinchuriki of Isabo the three-tailed turtle, wields a hook sword, looks relatively young with brown eyes and brown hair." After that, the proctor read out the final question, "Find the name and nickname if they have one of at least 5 Jonin of Kiri either past or current, who were not the 7 swordsmen of the mist or cages, and something of interest about them such as abilities, specialties, or position." Kitara responded with, Chukashi a natural sensor and is able to use hiding in frost, a variation of the normal silent killing technique, Harusum a seal master, and master to Utakata, Utakata Jinchuriki of Seiken the Six Tails. Mei Terumi holds two bloodlines, currently suspected of being leader of a rebellion against the current Mizukage, Tsurugi head of Kiri's Hunter Nin. Once she had given the information, conveying the team's results concisely in less than 15 minutes, which seemed a bit odd given how long it had taken to find that information, the proctor continued asking for details of how the team gained that information and more details to the answers while trying to destroy her confidence. Reference. How did you find all this information? The proctor asked. I have a Konoha technique called Cage Bushin. I sent multiple clones to the library. With some ryosa they could bribe the librarian for assistance in finding information quickly and ensuring accuracy. I also tailed the other teams with Cage Bushin to overhear their names, with my teammates gathering information from vendors, villagers, and anyone who looked official that was not clearly a proctor of this test. Kitara replied. Since you clearly found detailed information regarding the 7 swordsmen of the mist, you won't mind giving a brief description of their physical appearances, right? This will make up for your utter failure to find information on our third Mizukage. You did not even find out his name after all, the proctor said. I know we did not provide any information on him in our library, so if you answer in more detail the other questions I will excuse that utter lack of information on him, but you fail outright if you cannot recall those extra details, he heckled. Insert physical descriptions of 7 swordsmen of the mist when I have better internet connection. After another 15 minutes, with both her teammates standing silently on either side of her, the proctor finally gave up and dismissed her team. They would get the results a half hour after the time limit was up. Kitara did not let her relief show while still in the presence of the proctors. Instead, her team left to wander and relax until the time limit was over. Both Sasuke and Tomohiro congratulated her on the report and maintaining her composure, with Tomohiro admitting that he knew he would not have managed to answer all those questions with so much pressure on him, and Sasuke quietly complimenting the precise and efficient reporting and Kitara's responses to the mild interrogation by the proctor. Even if somehow their information was wrong somewhere and they did not pass, they were proud of Kitara for finding all that information and adapting to the extra details requested by the proctor. After a short time, all the teams went to the original room where the exam had started. Team Kakashi noticed that the Kusa team had already dropped out, as well as one of the Iwa teams. From the original 8 teams, or 24 people, there were now only 6, and the results had not even been announced yet. Surprisingly, one team from Kurigakure did not pass. All the other teams could go on to the second exam. Surprisingly, Kabuto approached the team and offered to help them out, stating, since we are the only 2 teams from Konoha and thus in the most danger, plus you are rookies, I'd feel bad leaving you to completely fend for yourselves. Team Kakashi learned from Kabuto that most Chunin exams followed a general pattern. The first test usually has something to do with information gathering, as well as their resolve. After all, shinobi's live depend on good information and no one can trust a coward. The second test usually tests the skills and abilities of the team, making sure they can actually survive a tough situation. Survival tests in harsh climates are very popular. Plus it subtly gives the hosting country an advantage since their genin already know how to survive in their country. The third exam is generally about showing off the individual skills of the survivors and usually has a tournament of some sort. Right after that, the exam proctor announced what they needed to do for the second exam. You will be going into our specially prepared swampy training ground, hunting for interlocking, metallic, puzzle pieces that will show an image of the secret entrance to the building you need to enter and the password you need to give. You will all receive 1 piece, but will have to find the other 3 pieces either in our training ground or from the other candidates. All three of the team were thankful that over the course of their training and missions everyone had finally passed the tree climbing exercise and at least started on water walking, because that was one of the only ways to make it through the swamp to gather the puzzle pieces, either from other teams or from hiding spots. Although technically the teams from Kurigakure had a huge advantage, all the other teams would also be after them, so it was more or less equal. This exam would really cut down on the numbers, since there were only 3 entire sets of puzzle pieces, with 3 teams out of the 6 still remaining automatically being cut out. Each team had 1 puzzle piece, and had to find 3 more pieces to go with it. Most of the teams would start out with different pieces, and if even one team found and kept a duplicate, that would cut down the numbers even more. With such small numbers, there would not be preliminaries. Any team that passed would automatically get to the final exam. There was a time limit of 6 days, and teams would have 3 weeks to train after that before the start of the final exam. After signing the waivers that were required for all ninja participating in the potentially deadly Chunin exam, Team Kakashi and the others started out into the swamp. At first, to save chakra, they tried to find solid ground to walk on, or tried to leap from tree to tree, but the trees were spaced far enough apart and the branches were thin enough to make that a bust. Solid ground was also very rare. Most of it was muddy at the very least, or so covered in leaves that they could not be certain if there were holes underneath. So Kitara kept coaching Sasuke and Tomohiro in water walking techniques, and they started to move faster, with Kitara creating some cage bushin to scout the surroundings and Sasuke activating his Sharingan eyes every once in a while to search for the puzzle pieces or other teams. After 5 hours, with a brief break to eat a small meal, the group started to search for a safe place to sleep. However, before that, they found the team from Kumogakure, and both teams started to battle for possession of the other team's puzzle piece. Given that the team was from Kumogakure, they used lightning jutsu to very good effect, especially with all the water around to multiply the effects. So Kitara added her one wind jutsu to Sasuke's dragon flame jutsu to increase the power in the hopes of overcoming at least one member. It succeeded. The Kumogakure team was burned badly, and some of the surrounding plants caught fire as well, making a great deal of smoke. Tomohiro had managed to catch another Kumogakure team member in a genjutsu, then knocked him out with the flat of his sword, so the remaining team member, Akunoichi, surrendered her puzzle piece and Team Kakashi left her alone. With 2 puzzle pieces already, and tired from the battle, the team searched harder for a place to sleep, finally deciding to sleep against a large tree, on slightly drier ground than usual. The 3 set watches, with Sasuke taking first watch, Kitara the second, and Tomohiro the third watch. The person on watch climbed the tree a bit to hide and get a better view. After a surprisingly uneventful night, Team Kakashi set out again, searching for the other 2 puzzle pieces they needed, or at least another team to try to take a piece from. All 3 also headed in the general direction of the building they had to get into. Right after the 3 had finished a break for lunch, they were ambushed by the Iowa team. Anime and manga. Although the 3 from Team Kakashi could somewhat use their surroundings since they were used to some water and trees, the surprise of the ambush nearly ended the fight in the very beginning, with Kitara receiving a large cut that bled heavily. However, once the first surprise was over, it was quickly clear that Team Kakashi were more skilled and had the advantage since the ground was too soggy to make for very offensive earth attacks that Iowa ninja favored. The fight dragged on though, since the Iowa team could make very good mud walls and mud clones, thus were not easily injured. If the Iowa team had been ambushed on ground, they knew they would have easily won, but as time went on the Iowa team slowly started losing. Once the team realized this, they desperately increased the intensity of their attack again, not liking the idea of their own ambush failing, and managed to daze Tomohiro enough to grab the puzzle piece he had been carrying. After that, the Iowa team retreated fast. Once they were gone, Kitara treated the head wound Tomohiro had, the various minor injuries both Sasuke and herself had, as well as cleaning and bandaging the big cut she had received, as well as donating some of her chakra to Tomohiro since his chakra levels were dangerously low. Then all three moved on. They had some luck, and one of Kitara's kage bushin found a hidden puzzle piece to replace the one they had lost. This time Sasuke carried one and Kitara carried the other. As it was nearing nightfall, the three heard the sounds of battle, and found Kabuto's team fighting a Kurigakure team. After hesitating and silently consulting each other, Team Kakashi decided to help Kabuto's team. With the two Konoha teams working together and Kabuto's very effective chakra scalpel, the Kurigakure team was quickly overwhelmed. Sasuke and Kitara automatically teamed up to attack one of the Kiri ninja, using taijutsu and their ninjutsu against him. Tomohiro and the two teammates of Kabuto worked together against the kunoichi, since she was surprisingly skilled. Kabuto practically started playing with the other male Kiri ninja, then knocked him unconscious when Kabuto grew bored. After only a few minutes, Kitara was able to distract the Kiri ninja, and Sasuke took the opportunity to sneak up behind him and hit him hard on the back of the head. Thus the Kiri team was defeated, with two members knocked unconscious, one with bruises, cuts and burns and the other with various tendons cut. While the other had been battling, Kabuto's teammates had distracted and held off the kunoichi long enough for Tomohiro to use a mid-level genjutsu looping the kunoichi's fears. So the third Kiri team member was now under the influence of Tomohiro's genjutsu, staring into space in horror, until Kabuto used some medical ninjutsu on that one and she seemed to go to sleep. After a brief moment of tension between the two teams, as they realized that technically they were competitors and would have to fight for the puzzle pieces, Kabuto broke that tension. "We shouldn't act hastily. After all, there might be enough puzzle pieces to go around for all of us," Kabuto said with a cheery grin. On searching the unconscious the Kurigakure bodies, they were surprised to find 6 puzzle pieces, a complete set with 2 duplicates. Kabuto offered to share the puzzle piece duplicates with Team Kakashi, while his team kept the complete set in exchange for his services as a medic for Kitara, Tomohiro, and Sasuke, and they found out that now they had all 4 puzzle pieces needed. Kabuto's team took off with the pieces they needed and 1 duplicate as well. Now all 3 of Team Kakashi hurried toward the building they needed at a fast pace, before they were ambushed again and lost their puzzle pieces. Team Kakashi hurried toward a building near the center of the swamp, reluctant to stop and rest lest they be ambushed again. The 3 all felt hopeful and at the same time frightened. They knew the 3rd exam would be even more dangerous than the 2nd, where all 3 were already scratched up and might have died. Tomohiro was nearing chakra exhaustion despite stealing some chakra from the Kurikagure team, and Kitara had needed to have help from Kabuto to bandage up and partially heal a second serious wound she had taken from the Kurigakure team that she could not heal on her own. Sasuke only had minor scratches and wounds, and was low on chakra, but he was in the best shape of the 3. Both Tomohiro and Kitara were considering forfeiting before the final Chunin exam started, even if the 3 all qualified by making it with their puzzle pieces. They knew there could be 2 more Kurikagure teams, Kabuto's team and the Iwa team that ambushed them, all trying to win as well. In addition, the 3 knew they had been lucky so far. Kurikagure had a reputation for high body counts in the Chunin exams they hosted, just as their Genin exams were more brutal than normal as well. To even manage to survive the 2nd exam was an accomplishment in itself. They knew that they would be much better prepared for the next exam, especially if they could watch the Chunin final exam. As usual, Sasuke was too driven to even think of quitting, comparing his strength to what he remembered of Itachi and coming up short. Although Sasuke was not as antisocial and driven as he would have been if Kitara had never befriended him, he was by no means warm or happy-go-lucky. He still worked extremely hard and tended to brood every so often. Kitara also worked very hard and trained most of the time, but she was willing to concede defeat when things became too life-threatening or when it was obvious she was outmatched. It had taken 6 Konoha ninja, with Kabuto an experienced medical ninja with impressive combat skills, and still it had taken nearly everything they had to take down the Kurikagure team, despite the relative quickness it had seemed to be accomplished in. Kitara knew that even with the 3 weeks training in between the second and third exam, they would not survive if they faced another Kurikagure team that was even close to the strength the defeated team had shown. Kitara knew the third exam would involve individual combat, so she knew Tomohiro would not stand a chance, and Sasuke was not likely to win either all his matches either, not to mention herself. Even with these troubling thoughts distracting them and the exhaustion from the battle, the three made good time, and as the sun set on the third day of the second exam they came into sight of the building that was their goal. Then they put the metal puzzle pieces together and found the door that would grant them entrance. Once inside they were met by an intimidating exam proctor who demanded the password and evidence of their puzzle pieces or else he would kill them. Hurriedly Tomohiro shouted the password, and Sasuke held up the 4 puzzle pieces that were already fit together tightly. The exam proctor silently nodded and led the three to a small series of bare rooms, with only a futon on the floor and a small table low to the floor, and with large pieces of canvas serving as doors. The walls were of course wood, and the floor also wooden. The three were told that dinner would be served in an hour in a large room near the center of the building, and then the proctor left, while with a sardonic glance at the large bandage on Kitara saying that no medical attention would be given until the official end of the exam unless they forfeited. Tomohiro was outraged, but could not summon up the energy to do much about it. Kitara just nodded to herself and headed to the bathroom to change her bandage and clean the wound, noticing with surprise that it seemed to be healing on its own. It was already half the size it had been and no longer seemed life-threatening or even like it would slow down her progress much. Once she had given herself a sketchy half-bath with a washcloth, Kitara left the bathroom and chose one of the rooms, telling her teammates that the bathroom was now free. Tomohiro used the bathroom to clean up next, and then chose a room, told Kitara to wake him when dinner was ready, and immediately fell asleep. Sasuke took a brief semi-shower using a large bucket with small holes hung from the ceiling and then went to the remaining room and put on his spare clothing that was not torn up and filthy like what he had been wearing, although parts of it had been cut off to use for the bandages. By then Kitara judged it had been nearly an hour, so decided to explore a bit and find the room with dinner before going back and waking up Tomohiro. She found the Iowa team that had ambushed them already waiting, leaning against the walls, and so quickly left to get her teammates, but rethinking her earlier decision to forfeit before even trying. After all, the Iowa team had mostly been lucky, and she thought that unless Kabuto's team was defeated and their puzzle pieces stolen that they would be the third team to pass. To her, this meant there was now a chance of surviving the third exam, and maybe even making a good enough showing for one or more of the three to be promoted to Chunin. She knew that Tomohiro was unlikely to be promoted, and she might not be either given her age, but she thought Sasuke was close enough to Chunin level to have a chance. Whatever the outcome, with a chance of surviving now even if she did not win, Kitara was determined to squeeze every bit of experience out of the exam she could. Anime and manga. When she reached the rooms, she quickly informed Sasuke that she had found the room with dinner, and that the Iowa team was already waiting. Kitara then proceeded to find a cup and fill it with water, knowing from experience that with how tired he was and the fact that they were in a secure location, nothing less than water and loud noise would wake Tomohiro up. After 10 minutes of trying, Tomohiro was finally up and complaining until Kitara mentioned dinner. Then he reluctantly dragged himself out of the room, still in his torn and filthy clothes, and started heading in the general direction Kitara pointed him to. Sasuke also casually made his way, with Kitara giving the 2 directions, mostly Sasuke who was awake enough to remember, while she yet again checked her bandage and then changed her clothing. She had found that the large, potentially life-threatening wound just above her stomach was now simply a large scab with completely new skin having been grown over most of the wound. Kitara was slightly weirded out. She knew she healed faster than most people, but she had never been that seriously wounded before, and to have it healing on its own that fast without her even focusing much healing chakra to the wound was unnatural. She decided to keep a bandage covering the scab anyway, so no one who had known of her wound would wonder at its fast healing and assume she was a fully trained ninja medic or something. When Kitara arrived at the room where dinner was to be served, she found Sasuke and Tomohiro glaring at the Iowa team from across the room, with rice and other food already placed in the middle of the table, but with neither team willing to sit down and eat before the other. Kitara sighed in exasperation and simply sat down on the cushion provided. Tomohiro followed Kitara's lead and sat next to her, with Sasuke simply glaring at the Iowa team for several long minutes, until the three Iowa team members sat down themselves. Only then did Sasuke sit down as well. Finally everyone began carefully serving themselves, carefully watching that the other team did not poison the food or avoid food that might already have been poisoned. Everyone ate in wary silence until eventually everyone had enough. Then one of the Iowa team carefully rose from the table, with Tomohiro following, then another Iowa team member, then Sasuke, the last Iowa team member, and finally Kitara. Both teams exited from opposite doors, and Team Kakashi made their way to their rooms. Tomohiro went straight back to bed, but Kitara and Sasuke stayed up a bit to talk of potential strategies for fighting the Iowa team and how they would train in the 3 weeks provided. They also wondered whether Kakashi would be showing up anytime soon, whether to congratulate them or help them train. Eventually Kitara decided to take a semi-shower and Sasuke went to bed, with Kitara going to sleep after drying off and putting her old clothes back on minus the weights that were sewed into the wrist and leg bands she wore, since she had no sleeping clothes. When Kitara woke she was sore, but felt that her chakra reserves were at completely normal levels, as if she had not done more than train hard the previous 3 days. Again feeling slightly uneasy with this evidence of strangeness, she checked under the bandage and found only a faintly red scar where a giant wound had been the day before. To deal with the soreness, Kitara carefully stretched and then lightly exercised to warm up. She decided to let Tomohiro and Sasuke continue sleeping, but washed the clothes they were not wearing and spread them out to dry. Kitara then wandered to where dinner had been served, hoping that breakfast would be served soon there as well. She found the room empty, but delicious smells coming from nearby, and assumed breakfast would be served soon, so decided to explore a bit more. She found a large arena open to the sky in the exact center, and a few more rooms, presumably for the exam proctors, guests, and in case there were somehow more than 3 teams who managed to pass. She then checked the food room again, and found someone placing a basket of bread on the table, and then heading toward the delicious-smelling room again. Kitara followed the man and asked if he needed help setting the table. He agreed, and Kitara helped to place the food in the center of the table. One of the Iowa team members then showed up, and glanced at the food suspiciously when he found Kitara already there. Because of the long history of Konoha and Iowa ninja hating each other, they were very suspicious and on alert in each other's presence. It was a wonder that battle did not break out. Again Kitara felt slightly irritated at the presence of the Iowa ninja and his suspicion, as if she would poison food that she and her teammates might eat, but had to admit to herself that she did not trust the Iowa team member to not poison the food enough to go get Sasuke and Tomohiro. She knew that none of the Iowa team was likely to eat something unless she had taken a bite first, and resigned herself to eating a tiny bit of everything in order to dispel their suspicions, and hopefully avoid battle. Both teams had refused to speak a word to each other the entire time. After waiting 10 minutes, Sasuke showed up, and Kitara told him to keep watch while she went to wake Tomohiro up, saying that the Iowa team member could not have poisoned the food since she had been there first, and somewhat loudly saying that she had not poisoned any food either. Then Kitara quickly made her way to Tomohiro's room, and hopefully tried calling his name to wake him up. She quickly gave up and tipped the futon over to dump Tomohiro on the ground, her second method to wake Tomohiro up when he was tired. Tomohiro woke up with a yell, then tried to go back to sleep until Kitara mentioned breakfast. Then Tomohiro got up, and was about to simply leave while still in the ragged, torn, and filthy clothes he had been wearing for the past 3 days, until Kitara pointedly told him that she had washed his other clothes and they had dried already. Tomohiro then took his clothes to the bathroom and told Kitara to save him a seat and some of the food. Kitara agreed and then left again, to find another Iowa team member up, with both leaning against a wall and Sasuke mirroring them and glaring again. Eventually everyone was sitting at the table again, and Kitara had carefully taken a small sample of everything to prove it was not poisoned, so everyone ate. After that, Tomohiro went back to their rooms to take a shower and nap again. Sasuke and Kitara headed toward the arena Kitara had found to get some practice sparring in, while everyone waited for the final team to make it or the time limit to pass. About an hour before lunch was served, a Kurikage team strode confidently in, astonishing Sasuke and Kitara, who knew that Kabuto's team had already had all 4 of the puzzle pieces themselves, but who had planned on resting and healing before heading in. It was apparent that this Kurikage team had defeated Kabuto's team, and they were probably even more powerful to be so unmarked and relatively uninjured. Kitara became somewhat nervous, and started questioning her decision again, before deciding that she would simply forfeit if she had to face any of the Kurikage team members. She realized that she was good at combat, but did not feel it was worth facing death in order to win. Given the fact that to her knowledge surprisingly few if anyone had died, the Kurikage team would probably want to change that to uphold Kurigake's reputation. The proctor announced that the terms of the 3rd exam would be explained after lunch, and to meet at the arena for that explanation. Sasuke and Kitara headed toward their rooms to inform Tomohiro of the new information. Kitara discovered that Tomohiro had woken up on his own, but was simply sitting on his bed. She told him that the Kurikage team had arrived, and what the exam proctor had told them all. Tomohiro stared at Kitara in disbelief, and asked if she were joking. What had happened to Kabuto's team? Tomohiro asked loudly. Kitara simply stated that, I don't know, I guess they lost to that Kurikage team somehow. If I have to face any of that Kurikage team, I'm forfeiting immediately. Before the exam even starts, they seem really strong and would probably try to kill me. Tomohiro agreed with Kitara quickly, looking frightened at the mere thought of fighting members of a team that had defeated Kabuto's team so easily. Lunch was even more tense than the 2 meals that had previously been eaten, with even Kitara being afraid to let down her guard and sit at the table with so many potential enemies. Eventually they worked it out with 1 team member from each team standing guard while the others ate, then the guarding team member eating with the other 2 standing guard. Kitara volunteered to stand guard first, with Tomohiro and Sasuke eating first. Since she had eaten a lot at breakfast, she was not very hungry for lunch. Once everyone had finished, all 3 teams cautiously backed out their separate doorways and headed to the arena for the announcement of the terms of the 3rd exam. Anime and manga. Without much surprise for the Konoha team at least, the exam proctor announced that the 3rd exam would be one-on-one combat, but that due to the uneven numbers 1 random person would be battling twice for the first part unless someone forfeited or was disqualified before the exams began. The exam proctor did not even pretend that the matches would be chosen randomly, just the person who would battle twice. The others would be chosen so they wouldn't face their own teammates in the beginning round, to let them get used to the idea of fighting each other first if 2 of the same team won. Everyone would pick a straw, and the person with the short straw would have the chance to battle twice. That person would be able to lose once if they won their other match, and if still be able to, could also battle the winners in the final part of the 3rd exam if they were still capable. To her shock, Kitara chose the short straw, and learned that Sasuke would battle a Kurikage team member first, with Tomohiro getting an Iowa, and she would battle one of each village. Kitara desperately hoped that she could battle the Iowa team member first, so that she could forfeit the second match, but then learned that she would not know who she was battling first until the match itself. Combatants also had to forfeit in the beginning, otherwise they battled until death, unconsciousness, or a debilitating wound. Kakashi showed up after the announcement was done, making some excuse for being late as usual. All the other Jonin instructors had already been waiting for their teams in the arena before the announcement started. He stated his surprise that they had made it this far, congratulated them, and was about to simply leave Tomohiro and Kitara hanging while he trained Sasuke when Kitara pointedly asked if he knew anyone who could help their training. Kakashi simply shrugged and said there would be at least one other Jonin observer as well as the representative for the Hokage who could not come this distance and leave the village for so long. Kitara and Tomohiro stayed together, with Kitara feeling vaguely that perhaps this might help them bond more, since she and Sasuke still automatically left Tomohiro out when it came to battling as a team, only making sure to keep aware of Tomohiro so they did not accidentally attack him or block his attacks. As they traveled to the temporary village, Kitara started mentally repeating the combat skills she knew. 1 low-level wind jutsu, the wind palm thrust, the academy basics, good taijutsu, accuracy when it came to kunai and shuriken, cage bushin, a low-level earth jutsu, and 2 low-level fire jutsu she had learned after watching Sasuke so often. Adding wind chakra to kunai didn't really work, since she had only seen it done once by a Jonin demonstrating and heard fragments of his explanation. Her medical skills were useless in combat unless she had a team to back her up while she concentrated. However, on the bright side, her chakra control and skills with those jutsu had skyrocketed once she realized that most of the memories of her cage bushin transferred to her after dispelling. She could manage the academy basics and the wind palm thrust without speaking and using only one hand for hand seals. Kitara also tried to guess the specialties of the various other teams, and her chances, by mentally describing what she knew of them. She still did not know which team members she was battling, just the village of origin. That would be announced just before the finals actually began. Of course, she knew the most about the Iowa team. The seeming leader of the team was large both in muscles and in height. He seemed to be at least 3 years older than Kitara herself, most likely more, and given the obvious muscles was likely very good at taijutsu. During the ambush at the second stage of the exam, Kitara had noticed that in addition to being good at substituting himself with his mud clone, he had shrugged off the few blows that landed. One of her cage bushin had even been dispelled upon hitting his chest. That meant he had some sort of passive jutsu to harden his skin temporarily and apparently good enough control, timing, and reserves to battle with it without having to stay still. She knew very little about the skills of the kunoichi, since Tomohiro had battled her. Judging by what little Kitara had observed, the kunoichi was good at dispelling genjutsu, flexible and fast, and preferred to pepper her opponents with kunai, shuriken, and mudballs. Of course, that was likely inaccurate. The Iowa kunoichi was likely to be good at throwing projectile rocks and earth with her jutsu, and just had the bad luck to be in a swampy rain forest at the time of the ambush. The third member of the team had stayed defensive for most of the short battle until the end, where he had suddenly attacked Tomohiro with the kunoichi, overwhelming Tomohiro quickly with a flurry of powerful blows using taijutsu, while also maintaining a jutsu he had caught Tomohiro in at the beginning of his sudden attack. That jutsu made part of Tomohiro's legs sink into the ground so he could not dodge, similar to the oddly named Headhunter Earth jutsu that Kitara had learned by reading a scroll. From the scavenger information hunt at the beginning, Kitara knew the Kurigakure team's names, and could guess at their specialties by generalizing based on clothes and country of origin, but knew nothing specific.